And now the big topic of the week, Bangladesh, which is facing its worst political crisis since independence in 1971, poses significant concerns for India's textile and apparel sector, particularly for the companies which are operating their factories in the neighboring country. This is what the Confederation of Indian Textile Industry said recently. Bangladesh is India's 25th largest trading partner with a bilateral trade volume of $12.9 billion per month.
And the textile industry experts also suggest that the supply disruption to the factories in Bangladesh are likely to have an immediate impact on the supply chain, potentially affecting production schedules and delivery timelines. Well, to weigh in on the topic, we are now joined by Mr. Easwaran Subramanian, who's a partner and Asia Pacific supply chain leader from Deloitte. Hi, Mr. Easwaran, thank you so much for joining us today. So tell us, the textile sector contributes a lion's share of Bangladesh's export. What does the recent turmoil really mean? Can international buyers shift their focus to alternative markets like India?
So you have to look at it in two perspectives. The first one is, I think, what is in the short term, and then potentially the medium term, right? See, I think in the short term, given some of the developments, which I think will get normalized soon, but given the short-term developments, I think there will be an immediate reaction from global buyers to look for more resilient opportunities. And quite naturally, given the adjacency that we have in India and an ecosystem that we have, there will be a short-term tilt of buyers into India to take the requirements into the festive season, which will also come up in the Western world. So that will be one opportunity that would anyway come to the Indian companies or companies based in India. And the competitiveness of firms in India will decide as to how that will be carried on into the future. Because once the supply chains come in a short-term phenomena, how do they really ensure that gets captivated for the long term will be a function of our competitiveness. So that's point number one. The second aspect that you should also understand is that there are also a lot of Indian companies who are actually having operations in Bangladesh. So I think by any estimate, I think anywhere between 20 to 25% of the companies in Bangladesh would obviously have an India origin. And to that extent, I think there will also be a shift of capacities into their existing facilities in India by those manufacturing organizations. So you'll have two implications. One is global buyers having an impact on supply chain resilience and therefore, a tilt to India. Second one would also be that Indian companies which are actually been leveraging Bangladesh, I think in the short term will obviously try to leverage their Indian capacities to ensure that they're able to supply to their customer requirements. So these are the two dimensions that you will have. So in our own estimate, I think if you really look at the way the Bangladesh exports are, you're doing roughly about what, 3.5 billion or so, roughly on a monthly basis. So therefore, I think even if you look at about anywhere between 10 to 15% coming in, you might end up with about roughly about 300, 400 million, roughly maybe 300, 350 million coming into India. So on a monthly basis. So I think it can actually contribute to another 3-4 billion in the short term. But I would expect that, once situation gets normalized, I think the supply chain competitiveness will take over.
All right. So, Mr. Easwaran, in such case, what can be the possible impact of this crisis can create on the existing supply chain? Can this political crisis have an immediate impact on the supply chain?
I think, frankly, from an overall supply chain perspective, and I'm sticking to apparel and garments that you spoke about, not the larger agenda, because if you take the larger India, Bangladesh supply chains, I think our portfolio of exports is a very varied portfolio. It's not just focused on one or two. And to that extent, what we are doing at about 11 billion or so on an annualized basis is across a wide variety of portfolio. And therefore, to that extent, I think we may not have an immediate implication from India's trade perspective. But if I take apparel and garments specifically, I think there will be a tilt of supply chains to the adjacent regions, and predominantly India is in a good position to sort of supply to global demand. So to that extent, I think there will be a resilience reaction from global companies, and that would mean an immediate shift into some of the geographies in Asia, which are also fairly good in apparel and garments. So to that extent, I think I would expect a short-term tilt of supply chains to these countries. The second one that I think also will be relevant structurally would be that the country is also having a shortage of dollars, and therefore I think they have to also, in the medium term, there will be some structural corrections that have to be made in those countries before they are able to recaptivate that supply chain. So I would expect this tilt of supply chains to remain for some time in the geographies where they are going, be it India or any of the other countries, and India is possibly best positioned to take advantage of it. So I would expect a tilt of those supply chains to India.
Well, all right. Thank you so much, Mr. Easwaran, for joining us today. But with that, it's time for us to slip into a